Today, we're deep diving into one of the most important levers that you have if you're a short-term rental owner, dynamic pricing. If you want to maximize the revenue from your rental, fill up your calendar, and reduce the guesswork, this video is for you. I'll walk you through how dynamic pricing works, why it's so powerful, how a professional management company handles it versus doing it yourself, and what to watch out for if you're operating in a Canadian market like Calgary. Also, if you are an investor who would like to be notified as new short-term rental approved properties come up for sale, just click the link in the description below. Dynamic pricing for short-term rentals is a system that adjusts the nightly rate automatically or semi-automatically based on the market conditions at the time. Unlike a static nightly rate that stays the same all the time, dynamic pricing aims to reflect the market reality. If demand goes up, maybe for a particular holiday or event, then the rates will go up. If demand softens, maybe it's due to seasonality or the fact that it's a weekday, rates can drop to attract more bookings and prevent vacancy. This constant granular adjustment can help you maximize two key factors: your occupancy and your average nightly rate, which together drive your overall revenue. A well-implemented dynamic pricing strategy aims for the sweet spot. This is where you strike a balance between occupancy and nightly rate so that over time, your revenue is maximized. So simply put, if you price your nightly rate the same every night, you're leaving money on the table. On high demand nights, say during Stampede Week, your property is simply worth more money. Conversely, on slower nights, if you maintain a high price, you risk losing occupancy. Algorithmic pricing rather than static pricing almost always leads to higher average nightly rates. Often you can see increases of around 5 to 15%, sometimes more, depending on how aggressive the pricing model is. Because of this, proper dynamic pricing is probably your single best tool for maximizing your ROI. Short-term rentals have fixed costs like mortgages, maintenance, utilities, that kind of thing. And these costs don't change based upon occupancy. So increasing occupancy, even at a slightly lower nightly rate, can dramatically boost your net profitability. In other words, once the fixed costs are taken care of, more nights rented will equal more profit. Dynamic pricing also helps you stay competitive in a market where other hosts are using the same technology. If you price too high compared to your competition, you risk having your unit be skipped by guests. Too low, and you risk underselling your property. Dynamic pricing helps you stay market aligned while optimizing returns. So, how do these tools actually work? Well, like everything these days, dynamic pricing relies on algorithms fed by data. The kinds of data that matter include how many bookings are happening in your area, how many nights are currently booked, how far in advance bookings are being made, day of week patterns, seasonality, local events, and competitor rates. Many third-party platforms will integrate with booking platforms like Airbnb and update nightly rates frequently throughout the day depending on demand shifts. With this type of software, you can typically set up guardrails like minimum and maximum nightly rates and adjust for things like the stay length minimums depending on how far out the booking is. This helps prevent over-discounting or overpricing when market conditions are fluctuating rapidly. In essence, it will read the market. It'll track occupancy pacing, anticipate special event demand, and factor all these things in when trying to determine the best price per night. So while these tools are powerful, they're only as good as how they're configured, monitored, and adapted to changing market conditions. And here's where a local professional management company can really add value. A good management company will bring human expertise and local market knowledge, as well as awareness for upcoming local events and how seasonality affects your particular market. On top of that, they should have a deep understanding of your particular property's strengths and weaknesses. With this, they can fine-tune pricing rules or override default suggestions when context demands, and optimize not just for occupancy or rate, but also for guest quality, long-term calendar stability, and profitability overall. So for example, third-party software like PriceLabs can get you part of the way there, but it may underprice high-demand nights if it's only looking at just the baseline data. Or it might over-discount during slow periods, leaving a lot of money on the table. Ideally, you want the pricing decisions informed by data, but determined by a human operator who understands the local market. So if you want to do it on your own, there are software tools and subscription services that will allow you to control dynamic pricing yourself. Many major vacation rental operations offer limited built-in dynamic pricing services. And those might be fine for you if, say, you have a smaller operation with only 1 or 2 units. One thing to keep in mind with these built-in services is a lot of the time you have to understand that they favor what's best for the company, not necessarily what's best for the host. Another thing to keep in mind with any of these dynamic pricing services, even the paid ones, is that there's a pretty steep learning curve. You need to understand how to interpret the data, tweak maximum and minimum rates, change rules for lead time, stay lengths, local seasonality, and monitor performance to avoid any unintended over or underpricing. Also, software alone can struggle for context. A tool might not always recognize a local festival or adjust for quick changes in market demand. And this gap between automated and optimized is where a lot of DIY owners tend to leave a lot of money on the table. For some, the DIY approach will work just fine. If you're someone who likes being more hands-on and learning the nuances of new tech tools, then I'd recommend you have a look around and see what's available. There are some great dynamic pricing tools available out there for DIY hosts. So while dynamic pricing is very powerful, it's not magic. One big common mistake a lot of people using dynamic pricing models miss is underpricing. If your minimum price is set too low and the algorithm continues to discount for occupancy, you might fill up your calendar but at rates that are under what your property is actually worth. Another major risk with the software is that it may ignore a lot of local context and smaller events. A purely algorithmic tool may not see a local event or other surges in demand that may justify a higher rate. Finally, dynamic pricing can't fix other issues. If your unit lacks amenities, has bad photos, or is in an undesirable location, no amount of dynamic pricing is going to correct these issues. Remember, pricing is just one issue, albeit a very important one. But at the end of the day, the guest experience is still what matters most. Okay, well, I hope that you now understand a bit more about how dynamic pricing for short-term rentals works. So if you found this video helpful, I hope that you'll hit like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.